buy it, put it on your bookshelf, read it, and then once a year go back and read it again. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If this is the first video of mine that you've come across, I'll give you a little bit of information about myself and about the channel. My name is Charlotte Furness. I am a writer, I'm a historian and a heritage researcher, and I put videos together on YouTube about writing, about researching, about what my life is like as a writer, and lots of different things. This is part of a new series which I started recently, which is called What I Read in a Particular Month. I've done two before now, what I read in April and what I read in May. Unfortunately, I couldn't do a June and July one as life got in the way and I didn't actually read any books during those months. But we're back on the wagon again now, and this video is what I read in August. So that's a little bit of a potted history about me. But this channel is also called Charlotte and Tom, and Tom's my husband, and we do videos about travel, lifestyle and the renovation of our home. And if you've watched a lot of my videos before and you're regular around here, welcome back. I hope you're going to like this video as well. We've got 4 books to go through today. So this is what I read in August. So I'm going to go in order of the books that I read this month, starting from the beginning of the month and working my way kind of up towards the end of the month. So the first book that I started off with in August is Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other. Now this book is one that I've been wanting to read for quite a while anyway, and then it was one that I bought in a whole kind of purchase of 4 or 5 books about Black lives in Britain and Black lives around the world, because if you haven't watched any of the other videos that I've done in this series, you may not know that I am committing myself for ever, for the foreseeable future anyway. I'm committing myself to reading 1 book every month, which is either based around a story of a person of colour or is written by a person of colour, and this is the one that I picked for this month, which is Girl, Woman, Other. It's a beautiful cover. So it's a bit of an odd concept book. It's a completely new structure. It's not so much a narrative which starts at the beginning and ends at the end kind of thing. It's quite different. There are 12, I've been describing this to people as a collection of short stories. It's a bit like a kind of all-star cast movie where there are lots of different storylines going on, but they all kind of slightly interweave and connect to each other. So it's 12 short stories, but each character in the story is connected to each other through very strange, not strange, sorry, they're connected to each other through very kind of minute links. You know, someone might know of somebody through something, or one of the women is the teacher of another character, or one of the women is the daughter of another character. So there's some very close relationships between characters, and there's some very kind of removed, very far removed connections as well. But that's quite interesting because the way that Evaristo, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, I'll have to so I've just had a look online, and the way you pronounce her name is Bernardine Evaristo. So I was saying it correctly before. I just wanted to make sure, because I want to make sure that I'm saying it in the proper way, in the correct way, so that I can give the most respect to the book, really. So I don't know if you can hear the washing machine in the background. I'm really sorry if you can hear the washing machine in the background, by the way. I was going to film this a bit later when the washing machine had finished, but I really just want to talk about these books, so you're just going to have to deal with some washing machine noises in the background. It's not very loud, hopefully, so I'm talking loud enough that hopefully it'll just be a little bit of background noise. But like I say, I really want to get on and talk about all the books in this video, so that's that. So yeah, the thing that I absolutely love about this book is that it's a very unusual way to construct a fiction book. I don't read a lot of short stories, so if you are a person who does read a lot of short stories and a lot of more unusually crafted narratives, this isn't probably very unusual to you. But for me, I'm used to reading very kind of traditional fiction books, and so this was quite different for me, and I was a little bit unsure of how I was going to get on with it. She also doesn't use any what's the word, punctuation. She uses commas, but she doesn't use full stops, so sentences kind of just run on and on and on. And when I first started reading the book, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can get on with this, because I'm a bit, I suppose I'm a literature graduate who never really got on board with kind of the more out there literature stuff. So you'd read all these really weird books at university that kind of really play around with craft. They really play around with what constitutes a novel, what constitutes a book, what constitutes a sentence even. And I never really got on board with that. I like a story that's a story. I want to be completely drawn into the narrative. I don't want to have to spend time unpicking the kind of the theory behind why that sentence has been made before reading the sentence. And I know that that's a really, really strong area of kind of literature, what's the word I'm looking for, literature evaluation, critical theory, that kind of thing. I know a lot of people want to do that, and that's not a problem at all if that's the kind of thing you're into. But yeah, I'm not massively. This reading book list, these reviews aren't me reading what I think I should be reading or what people have told me are the best books in the world. This is me picking a list of books, or picking books off my bookshelf that I really want to read, either to educate myself or just to escape from the world or just to have a good time. So this isn't going to be a huge critical theory video or series or anything like that. So when I started reading this book and I realised that there was a very different way of crafting the narrative, I was a bit concerned that I wasn't going to get on with it, or that I wasn't even going to be able to read it, because sometimes with things like this I find myself not able to fall into the narrative. Luckily this was not one of those books. Like I say, it was a bit of a shock at first, and it took me probably the length of the first kind of chapter, short story, for me to kind of really fall in with the kind of the rhythm of the book. But after that, it was absolutely fine. You kind of, the language itself gives you natural pauses, so you don't necessarily need the punctuation as much as you think you would do. There's a couple of bits where you stumble a little bit over, oh, who actually said that? But you just go back and reread it very quickly. It didn't take anything away from the narrative. So that's kind of the craft of it. The stories themselves were absolutely incredible. They were so ordinary, but extraordinary at exactly the same time. Obviously these are stories of black women's experiences in Britain, and they kind of transcend a few different decades, even a century at one point, and it's the young women, old women, kind of every kind of type of woman that you would expect is like kind of relayed in this book, and that's what I really loved. It wasn't just one woman giving her story, it was, like I say, 12 women giving their stories. And it is fiction, but it's not fiction at the same time. You know that every single event that's happened in these books, every single thing that these women have gone through, is actually what's happening out there now, or has happened to women, especially black women in this country, in the past. And you just know that that's part of it. So even though you can look at it and say, oh, it's fiction, it's not. And I think it's beautiful the way that the back of this book describes it. It says it's future, it's past, it's fiction, and it's history. And I think that sums up this book absolutely brilliantly. You're kind of reading this book and all the time you're going, oh God, yeah, I know that, I'm sure that does happen, and that is horrific. And then something else will happen and you go, oh God, no, why is that happening? And I have to admit, I got to the end of the book and I didn't want it to finish. I wanted more stories. 12 isn't enough, in my opinion. Obviously, it is for a book, but I want this to be like the first in an anthology series of these stories, and I want us to keep meeting more women and to learn more, because I think this book is really educational for anyone who really wants to know more about black women's lives in Britain. You know, it's not just America that has problems with racism and institutional racism and just general day-to-day racism. Britain has a lot of it as well, and it's a problem over here, and so it's not enough to just educate yourself on what's happening in America. You have to educate yourself on the UK as well, and I think this is a really good book for telling those stories without you having to go to black women for those stories. It's not the job of black women to tell you their personal stories so that you can learn more. You have to go out there and find those stories for yourself, and you have to educate yourself, and this is a good book for doing that. It's harrowing at times. There were times when I had to put it down and walk away, not because I wanted to walk away from the reality of what was going on. I had to put it down. I had to go and think about what I'd read, and I had to absorb it, and I had to think about what not my role in that is, but to what extent those experiences are still happening today, and where I sit in that, and what ways that I can work to help try and remove that. It's all part of being tied up with that, making myself aware of my position of where I stand in the UK and the story of racism and white supremacy in the UK. So do you know what? It's a book that if you want to just read it and put it back on the shelf, you can do. I think it would still stay with you. I think you'd still learn things, and it would still change you, even if that's all you do. I'm going to be rereading this for sure, because this book was just so important to me in my educational story, and it's a type of book that actually, because all the stories are kind of standalone, you can dip into any part of it. You can kind of go back to a specific person or character and just read their story. So I often reread books. You'll know that if you've watched the other videos in this series. So this is one that is going on my shelf to be reread. And yeah, I am already looking forward to more stuff from Bernardine Evaristo. So yes, highly recommend it. I'm going to give this a 5 out of 5. To be honest, I can't fault it. I cannot fault it at all. I think it's absolutely astounding. Buy it, put it on your bookshelf, read it, and then once a year go back and read it again. And read more of her stuff. There's 2 books on the back here. One's called Mr. Loverman, and the other one's called The Emperor's Babe. So I'll be looking up some of her stuff and buying some more in the near future. So yeah, go buy it. Right, so the next book I'm going to move on to is one which I'd seen kind of on people's book lists, and I buy a lot of my books secondhand off Facebook, and I'd seen a lot of people putting this on to sell, but then being bought really quickly by other people. So I assumed that it was one of those books that people wanted. You get an idea sometimes, don't you, about books that are particularly popular. You know that a lot of people are asking for it, a lot of people are buying it, and this was one of those. And I have to say, it was a bit of a... I wasn't sure whether I was enjoying it or not, but actually I did, and that is The Miniaturist by Burton. And this, again, it's another beautiful book cover. I think that I'm a bit of one of these people who's a sucker for a book cover, and I am one of these people who does judge a book by its cover. Not necessarily massively judges it, but I know that I'm attracted to a book that has a really, really pretty book cover, and this is one of them. So I didn't realise that this is actually very loosely based on true events. The people in the book are real historical characters, which I didn't realise when I started it. And I had to, when I did because you realise pretty quick on, there's actually a picture. There's actually a picture right in the beginning of the book, which is Nella's Miniaturist cabinet. And that is currently in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, which I visited in January. I have this vague recollection of seeing this Miniaturist cabinet, but I can't actually remember it, and I don't have any pictures of it. But yeah, I went to the Rijksmuseum in January, before everything kicked off with COVID. And yeah, it's held there. So you realise when you start looking through the first few pages of the book, you realise that it's kind of more of a true account. So then I had to stay away from Wikipedia, which is actually something that I do quite a lot. I do quite a lot of Googling and extra research even while I'm reading a book. So if I find something that's interesting, think, oh, I didn't know that, I'll instantly go on my phone and I'll look it up. Or because this is based in the centre of Amsterdam, I did quite a lot of street view Googling. So if they like mention a particular street, I was like looking at it. So you get a bit more of a visual clue as to what the place looked like. And I kind of like doing that. So yeah, I had to stay away from Wikipedia so I didn't spoil the ending for myself. But it's basically a story of a young woman called Nella who is from a very old but very poor family in Amsterdam. Not Amsterdam, sorry, in Holland. And because it's an old family, they've got a really good name, and so she marries this kind of up-and-coming merchant in Amsterdam called Brandt, Johannes Brandt, and he's got the money but he hasn't got the lineage, and so he marries Nella to kind of cement his position in society. But he's a bit odd from the very beginning. He doesn't, when they get married, I think like in her hometown, and then she moves to Amsterdam and he's not even there to like receive her on the first day that she turns up, and it's all very odd. It's a bit gothic thrillerish at the beginning. That's kind of the feel that you get of it. It's very much oh, which books does it remind me of? It reminded me of the one with the keyhole, and I can't remember what it's called now, but I reviewed it not so long ago on my channel. Let me just find the name of it. Yeah, it reminded me at the beginning a little bit of The Silent Companions, which I reviewed in my May book review video. That kind of coming to an old house, it's quiet, it's got an atmosphere, it's a bit mysterious. It kind of had all of that going for it at the beginning. And to be honest, it kind of lost me a little bit in the middle. There's kind of two plots going on. There's kind of what's happening in the house, which is a very kind of weird house. There's a lot of very strange relationships going on. There's a very strange kind of, Johannes Brandt's sister is kind of running the house and she's got secrets and this, that and the other. And I loved that side of it. But then there's also this kind of parallel storyline of the miniaturist and the house. So not long after she moves in to her new marital home, her new husband buys her this, well, it's a doll's house, but they call it like a miniaturist cabinet, or they call it different things in the book. I'm going to call it a doll's house because it's easier to remember. And then he gives her this kind of directory, this 17th century directory, which I had to Google, and it is a thing. In the 1680s, sorry, people did pay to have like an advert put in this kind of printed collection of people's services. And that's quite cool. It's like a 17th century yellow pages, which is pretty cool. So yeah, she finds this miniaturist who's going to make her like little figures and cabinets and things to go inside this doll's house. But the miniaturist like predicts things and like sends her stuff when Nella hasn't even asked her to send her something. So Nella kind of commissions her to make like 3 random things right at the beginning of the book. And then later on the miniaturist just sends her more stuff that she hasn't asked for, but they're things that are inside the house that the miniaturist would never have kind of guessed at unless something was going on. And I don't want to spoil the end of the book because I know people will want to go and read this, but I expected the ending, I expected it to finish differently. So I tell you what, if you haven't read this book, I'm going to put a little timestamp somewhere up here. Skip through to that next timestamp and you'll miss any of the spoilers. But if people have read this, I'd kind of like to discuss the spoilers at the end of the book. So that's what we're going to go on to now. So if you haven't read this, skip ahead to the time that I'm putting up here. And if you have read it, then we'll chat about the ending now. So yeah, as the plot goes on, I kind of expected the miniaturist story and Nella's kind of story at the house with Johannes and his sister would all become intertwined. Like I was reading it and I was like, it's the sister's the miniaturist, and then I was like, maybe she's not. And then I was like, it's the maid's the miniaturist, or like maybe the maid's friend. So the maid has a friend who works in a bakery with her husband, who owns a bakery with her husband. And I thought it was the maid's friend that was the miniaturist. And so I was expecting there to be some kind of like real reason behind this kind of weird thing that was going on between Nella and the miniaturist. There was almost a bit of like romantic attraction between the miniaturist and Nella. So the miniaturist turns out to be a woman, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that being a part of the storyline. But then this miniaturist doesn't have any connection to the other parallel storyline. Turns out she's just a clockmaker's daughter who has got this kind of really weird, eerie almost paranormal ability to see into people's futures and like predict people's futures based on kind of her seeing them, and then sends them little items for their dolls' houses that predict the future and stuff. And at the end of the book, Nella finds out that the miniaturist has been making things and sending things to numerous other women across Amsterdam and like manipulating their emotions, this, that and the other. And it's really interesting, but it doesn't tie to the main storyline at all. So I think it would have been good if it had turned out that the miniaturist had been connected in some way to all of the houses. Like, you know, is she providing a very small service that nobody thinks of twice, like, I don't know, delivering wood, delivering bread, something like that to the house, and nobody sees her twice, nobody even like pays attention to her, but she's taking in all these little details and she's making these miniatures and manipulating people. That would have been really interesting as a storyline. So I was a bit like, what's the point of this miniaturist storyline? And maybe I missed something, maybe I missed some kind of key moment in that, but that was the only thing that I didn't really like about it, was the fact that yeah, it felt like there wasn't really much in that kind of storyline and a reason for it, if you know what I mean. The main storyline between Johannes and Nella and the family is fantastic, and I think that's done really well. And I had guessed about 2/3 of the way through that Johannes was gay, but I wasn't entirely sure. And then when that's revealed, and then there's the whole thing of, you know, the family are working to try and save him and to cover up the fact that he's gay and all this, that and the other. It's a really, really lovely storyline. I mean, it's not lovely because obviously it's horrible what they did to him, which, you know, he was killed in the end for his sexuality. But it's really good that that's been put into a storyline, it's been put into a book, it's been talked about, kind of the history of sexuality in Holland. And yeah, that was I really appreciated that kind of as a storyline, and I thought it was really well done. And I thought Nella's, you know, her kind of reaction, even though she catches her husband having sex with another man, ultimately she still wants to support him and she still wants to kind of look after him. And I thought that was a really beautiful moment in the book. And then there was the birth of the baby and the pregnancy and all that kind of stuff, and that really I kind of guessed that the baby would be the servant guy's, I can't remember what his name is now, Otto. So I kind of had an idea that the baby would be Otto's, only after the birth they said something and I was like, Otto, that's who she's been with. Kind of seemed a bit too obvious that it was going to be these kind of people outside the family. So there were a few twists and turns that I really, really liked. But yeah, overall, I was like, it was like 80% absolutely amazing, and then 20% I was a little bit disappointed. But it's still a completely new storyline, a completely new place. I've never read a fiction book set in 17th century Amsterdam before, and I really hope that people write more of them, because I love this idea of there being like a Jacobean Amsterdam that is in many ways quite similar to London, and yet in many ways not as well. I love the way that Burton, she kind of showed snippets of the Amsterdam culture and people's opinions and their sense of kind of people and place. She did that really beautifully, and she did it with little snippets throughout the book. It was very much like telling us a lot about the culture of the times and the belief of the times and what people held dear in that area, but it was done really subtly. It's very, very well written, is this book, I have to admit. So yeah, that is The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton, and if you haven't read it, then go buy it. It's a good book, I highly recommend it. I would give it probably, what would I give it? 4 out of 5, I think. 3.5, 4 out of 5, somewhere between that really. I will probably read it again at some point in the future when I've forgotten what happens. I have book amnesia, and after a while I will forget what happens in a book. So for me, I can reread a book numerous times and it's like reading it, not for the first time, but you know, I will forget nuances of what happens. So it's definitely going to stay on my bookshelf, not only because it's a beautiful book. And yeah, that's The Miniaturist. So after reading The Miniaturist, I wanted something that was a little bit different again. So we'd had Girl, Woman, Other, which was very contemporary. Then we'd gone all the way back to the 17th century with the Miniaturist, and I wanted something that would make me think a little bit more. Something, not so much think in terms of thinking about myself and challenging myself and my beliefs like I did with Girl, Woman, Other, but I wanted something that was quite a thinky novel. Do you know what I mean? You'll know what I mean when I say what this book is. Unfortunately, it hasn't got a dust jacket. It is just a plain book at the moment, so I'll hold it up this way. This is The Lost Symbol by Dan Brown. And I think this is only like the third one in the Robert Langdon series. I've read all of the Robert Langdon series, apart from this one, and I buy them when they come out new. I think the latest one was it Origin, the latest one that's set in Spain. And yeah, I really like them. I think they're very cleverly done. I think Dan Brown is an absolutely remarkable story writer. How he gets all of the tiny little details in just blows my mind, really. He is Langdon, absolutely. So yeah, I knew that this one was around. I knew that The Lost Symbol existed, but was actually busy reading the newer ones and hadn't ever come across a copy. And where I do some freelance work, it's actually in a library building, and they have a cart of books outside the library that you can buy for 20p or more. And so every time I'm there, I kind of pick up a couple of books, and this was one of them. So I looked at this, and at the moment we're doing renovations upstairs, which is why I'm filming this in the kitchen. And I haven't got access to all of my books, so I'm kind of limited in what I can read at the moment. It's just like what is out on the shelves or what I didn't quite get around to putting into storage. And this one was in the cupboard upstairs, and I thought, oh, that is exactly what I need. That's exactly what I want to read next. Dan Brown books are the type that they really make you think about the context with which they're writing in. So, like with the Da Vinci Code, you know, you were thinking about the mystery and the story and what it could mean, and there's little clues and there's ciphers and there's, you know, like different things that you can kind of learn, you know, and I love learning all about like symbology and all that kind of stuff. So I really enjoy all of those books. And this one's the same. So Lost Symbol is the same as all the other Dan Brown, Robert Langdon series books. It's Robert Langdon again, gets embroiled in kind of a, how would you describe it? It's not a murder mystery because nobody really dies. It's kind of more a let's save the world type of situation, and this particular book is tied in with the Masons, and so there's it's kind of hard to describe it. I want to tell you like a very potted history of what the book's about without revealing too much, or without going on for ages, because otherwise this film's going to be really long. But basically Langdon ends up getting tied into this, kind of chasing down this bad guy who's wanting to cause a load of political problems around the world by revealing some information about the Masons to the public. And so Langdon is brought in to kind of decipher the codes, to work out what's going on, and it's all around kind of myth and fact and fiction and all that kind of stuff. Really, really good. I think that this book does, however, rest quite heavily on faith, and maybe that's why this one hasn't done as well as some of his other books. This one's, with the Masons, it's very much around God and spiritualism and the belief in like a higher power. And if you are not religious, don't have a faith, and really are against all of that, then I'm not sure you would enjoy this book at all. I used to be quite religious. I was christened as a Protestant, but over the years, the more I've kind of grown up, the more I question things. So now I describe myself as being more agnostic, and that means that I believe in a higher power, I have faith, but it doesn't subscribe to any one particular religion. That's kind of how I describe myself at the moment. So for me, I don't have a problem reading this book. I find it quite interesting, and I like to learn about different people's beliefs and different cultures and different faiths. But I think if you really don't want to read anything like that, you probably wouldn't like this book that much. So the thing that I really got interested in whilst reading this book is the theory of noetic science. Now that is the theory that the human mind has a greater ability than we use it for at the moment. So I think I've heard it bounced around before that humans, you know, only use 10% of our brains or something like that. And I recently did a podcast with someone who said that, I think is it language? That we actually, oh no, hearing, that actually we lose 80% of our ability to hear by the time we're adults. That actually when we're born as babies, we can hear a wide range of things. And actually the experience of living in the world, our brain has to silence certain parts of things and make us deaf to those things, because otherwise we won't be able to focus, we won't be able to live and be able to kind of make sense of things. So that's quite interesting. So noetic science is kind of the opposite. It's the idea of using our brains for a higher purpose and a higher power than we have done. So things like, you know, Uri Geller, who can bend spoons with his mind. It's kind of that theory. So one of the characters, Catherine Solomon, in this book is a scientist who works on noetic science, and she does experiments that kind of test to what extent the human mind is capable of exerting a power. And she even goes as far in this book, her character goes as far as saying that thoughts have a mass and thoughts have a weight. And so, you know, if everybody comes together in collective prayer, for example, that can physically change the world. Not sure how much I believe in it. I really want to learn more about noetic science, and so I'm going to do more research after this. I'm going to look into it, and I did a bit of Googling, as I do, while I was reading this book. I like the idea of it. I mean, it would be amazing if we could untap the power of our brains a little bit more than we use them for at the moment. I think that'd be amazing. Not only because when you're laid in bed and you've forgotten something, you could go, book, phone, juice. I like the idea of having Matilda-esque powers. That would be wicked. But yeah, I like that idea. So I think that's quite an interesting theory that comes out of the book. The book goes a bit further. It ties it all into the power of God and faith and stuff. Bit too much for me, but the basics of noetic science I think are really interesting. So yeah, the weakness in the book, I think, is the kind of big reveal, the kind of the threat that is underlying Langdon's desire to save the world, save the kind of, save the cheerleader, save the world, that kind of thing. The end result, and I don't want to tell you because it kind of spoils the book a little bit, the end result is that, actually, I don't think it does spoil the book, because everybody knows that Robert Langdon always saves the day. So the threat in this book is that the kind of the villain is going to release some video footage which shows several political people that are high up in the Masons. And that's it. It's like, oh, well, you know, if everybody sees these rituals that politicians are going through, there'll be uproar and it'll change the world and everybody will kick off and, you know, wars will be started and this, that and the other. And maybe it's just because of the times that we're living in at the moment. I mean, this was written in, when was this written? I want to say 2008. 2009 this was published. You know, that's 10, 11 years ago. The world really, even just 10 years ago, was different from what it is now. You know, shit, we're living in Trump's America. So, you know, I mean, I'm not, thank God, but I mean, I'm living in fucking Burjo's England, so, you know, things are not going well for the world at the moment. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. So I think the idea of the world being shocked and awed and horrified by finding out that top politicians are in the Freemasons just didn't really feel like enough of a threat to me. Like in the later books, which is the one that's got the virus, Inferno. In Inferno, there is a deadly virus that's going to be released and half of the world is going to become infertile, which they don't tell you that in the film. So if you've only seen the film Inferno, that's not how the book goes. So in the book, the virus will make half of the population infertile and will therefore control population control in coming generations when half of the world can't have children. In the film, they changed that and they were like, the virus will wipe out half of the population immediately. Which obviously I understand they have to do that for film purposes, but that's a threat, isn't it? That's a real threat. You know, if a virus is going to wipe out half of the world or make half of the world infertile, I mean, Jesus, we're in the middle of coronavirus. We can all see how that's impacted the world. That's a real threat. Whereas, yeah, I just thought it was a bit weak was the threat in this book. But you know, it doesn't take away any of my enjoyment of this. I still absolutely love the Dan Brown books. So I would recommend this, but maybe I wouldn't recommend it as the first in the Langdon series. If you've never read a Dan Brown book before, I can honestly recommend that you start right at the beginning of the series. Now, the films start with The Da Vinci Code. That's not actually Dan Brown's first book. His first book is Angels and Demons. So I actually recommend you start with Angels and Demons. That's the very first book in the series, and it's one of the best, I think. It's really interesting. Yes, it's about the Catholic Church, but it's actually quite critical about it. It actually really does kind of, you know, spit on the Catholic Church a bit. So I would recommend that you start with that one and then maybe come on to this one after you've read 2 or 3 other ones. You know the style, you know the story, you know Langdon, and so you can overlook some of the weaknesses, and you can also overlook this underlying faith thing that is going on throughout this one. So yeah, that was the 3rd book that I read this month. Now those are kind of all of the main books that I read. Only 3, I know, but August was a busy month. Believe me, it's only like the 13th of September, no, 14th of September at the moment. I've already read 3 books. So there's going to be more books coming next month. But I did just want to note that I am still working on my White Supremacy, no, Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. If you don't know, I'm actually in a book club of people who are all working through this book together to kind of think about white supremacy and challenge our own privilege and position and combat help, and to help make us better kind of advocates of anti-racism and that kind of thing. So yeah, just wanted to note that I've been working on that book as well over this month. And yeah, I hope you liked my book review. This was what I read in August. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you've read any of the books below. If you want to have a chat about them, then put a comment down below. Always happy to chat through the comments. You guys know that I look through all my comments. I respond to as many as I can, unless I get a trolling comment, and then I completely ignore it. But yeah, come and chat to me, and if you want to follow me on any social media, that'll all be in the description box below. I think that's about it for now. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are in the world, and we'll be back soon with more renovation videos from me and Tom, and I'll probably see you again writing wise for another book review. Thanks.